For a conversation on America's economic forecast, please welcome Cecilia Rouse, president of the Brookings Institution, with The Atlantic's Annie Lowrey.
Hey, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Rouse. I did not exactly realize that we were going to have America's economic forecast on a large screen behind us. And I slightly just want to be like, how is it? So I'm very worried.
So I almost brought a prop because especially when I was chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and we were coming out of the pandemic and then sliding into this period of inflation, people would ask me for the forecast. And economic forecasting on a good day is, somewhat art. And we did a report of the CEA, we could actually see that economic forecasting was getting worse because our economy was behaving in ways that we hadn't understood because of the supply constraints, and we'll probably talk about that as we go. And so I would often say, my crystal ball is a little cloudy. And so my team gave me a cloudy crystal ball as a parting gift. And I literally almost brought it today. So
I wish that you had. And I wanted to start because I think I and probably everybody in this room is in a nervous place, a tense place, a worried place where we were talking a couple months ago, the economy looked great-ish. The economy, the jobless rate was pretty low. GDP growth seemed pretty good. Wages were rising, including at the lower end. So those were good trends, which is not to say that there weren't problems. Now we have some strong headwinds. And I wanted to ask you first, have you changed your behavior? Not just in your economics hat,
just in
your everyday life and as the head of the institution that you're leaving. Have you changed anything?
Okay, so I'll start with my personal life. I bought a little extra toilet paper. I bought a little extra paper. And I think I read somewhere that the price of rice and olive oil might go up. I bought a little extra rice, a little extra olive oil. But more seriously, what that reflects is what I think is our biggest challenge right now, which is uncertainty. We just don't know. If President Trump had said we're putting on 10% tariffs across the board, economists would be, explaining why that wasn't a good idea. Some would be in favor, some not. There would be some academic debate. But fundamentally, our economy could adapt. Businesses could make decisions about shipping and inventory and production, understanding that this, somewhat higher than usual, but 10% tariff was in place. Instead, we have this, what we've seen to date is the reciprocal tariff strategy, where it's on, it's off. And with the Chinese, we're at 145%, which is just if you were a small business shipping, quantities for some discretionary item of 1,000, you can't increase the price by 145% and still have anybody who's going to buy that product, right? You're just priced out of the market. And so effectively what we have is an embargo. So we have a lot of uncertainty. We can talk about this. We have, I think it's an inventory game, but I think that's our biggest challenge right now. In terms of Brookings, I think this is the kind of moment that Brookings was built for. And we're trying to say, look, this is an administration that is rethinking the federal government. I think I was charitable in saying thinking, but okay. That this is a government that has radically changed both what the federal government is doing, how it's doing operations. We've dramatically changed our relationship vis-a-vis both our friends and our place in the world order. And so the question is, I think in your last panel was talking about how I don't think anybody would stand up and say that everything was working perfectly before. In fact, I think far from it. But there was kind of a sclerosis that had set in that didn't allow for significant reform. We now have an opportunity to say, okay, that may not have been right, and we're pretty much starting over in some places, more than others. So what is the right way to do it, or what would be a better mousetrap? So at Brookings, we're trying to take that on quite seriously. And I think, if you look at, so Derek was saying that this is a political opportunity, that our political systems have been outdated. I would argue that many of our federal systems as well. that our economy is very different, our society is very different, and we need to have a modern, especially federal government, this goes all the way down, that reflects the fact that our economy is much more built on services and now digital services, that women have entered the labor market, and just that we are just a very different, we don't have lifetime jobs like we used to. And we need a very different system for addressing this, many of these challenges if we're going to go forward.
So I want to come back to that question of the longer term and stay in our fearful little moment here for one more minute, which is just look out over the next 3 to 6 months. What numbers are you looking at to tell you how this is going to play out? Because one thing that strikes me about this moment is that we have not had tariffs this high as an effective tariff rate since 1909. That was a very different economy than it is right now. We've not had this kind of inflationary shock exactly since the it's a weird moment, 1980s, 1970s. It's unusual. And so just next 3 to 6 months, when you're opening up the paper, reading the Atlantic, or where are you looking for, what are you looking at for what could be hitting and when it's hitting?
So we know tariff is a tax. So we know that it's going to increase the price of goods at least one time. And one of the things that we're looking at, there's a range of estimates out there, but that this is somewhat regressive. And so like by one estimate by the Budget Labs and former colleagues in the Biden administration estimate that like it for the second decile, so if you divide income by 10 into 10 groups, then the second decile, the tariffs that went into effect as of, I think it's April 2nd or so, would increase prices for those in the second decile by about 4%, for those in the top decile by about 1.6%. So this is going to disproportionately impact poorer households. So that's one thing that we're already looking at. But the thing that I think is the uncertainty is causing, and that I'm starting to pay much more attention to, is inventory. So shipping from China is down something like 40% since the beginning of April. Satellite imagery tells us that there's not a lot of ships that are leaving ports in China. So what this means, and there was a lot of retailers that if they could advance order and they had warehouse space, they did that in advance because we knew tariffs were coming. So this is an inventory game for those who had enough inventory. What I worry a lot about are the small businesses. Small businesses account for about 50% of our private sector employment. They don't necessarily have the big warehouses of inventory. They're also the ones that can't, especially I just described the small discretionary, you can't increase your prices by a lot. I worry that we suddenly just go over a cliff, that they don't have liquidity. Banks aren't lending because what are you lending for? You lend if you think that there's a chance that the business can repay, but if we don't know how long these tariffs are in effect, and if the orders aren't being put in to do production in China, then what are you lending for? Eventually, again, even the small businesses could change their business model and either produce in a different country or sell to a different country, and not in the United States. But all of that takes time. And so what I worry about, and what I'm starting to watch, is what are retailers and other producers saying about how much inventory is actually out there? When are we really going to start to see the shelves starting to become bare? And I think, if you listen, we're within a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. I think Christmas is likely already going to be affected because I think they put in those pre-orders. And then again, it's going to take time. I think President Trump could turn off these tariffs tomorrow, and those ships are still not on the ocean yet. They have to cross. We have to refill the inventory. So that is where what I'm starting to watch.
Yeah. And so if we were thinking that we were having a slowdown or a recession, you normally have there's many economic policy responses that you could have. So normally two big ones. Take interest rates down, you loosen up monetary policy, and you have more expansive fiscal policy. So maybe you send folks checks, maybe you cut taxes, maybe you do more government spending, government projects. How do you see, run the tape forward? What happens if we do those things? How much can we kind of repair this with our standard two tools?
Well, as we learned through the pandemic, when we have a supply constraint, we can give people the income, and what we will do is spark a period of inflation because we will be increasing demand, but we will have a supply constraint. So what we need is to, do we say the word abundance? What we need to do is we need to be increasing, right? We just need to lower the tariffs, right? We are a global economy. So, President Trump's ultimate goal, which is to bring back manufacturing, to bring back more capacity in the United States, I think is actually a worthy goal to be shooting for. I am in the camp of someone who believes that we are part of a global economy, and I'm not trying to change us being part of the global ecosystem. But I think if we learned anything through the pandemic, that having some domestic capacity is important in some critical areas. And so I believe we need to be doing some of that. I don't believe we can be isolationist. I think that's counterproductive. I don't think that's healthy for anybody. I don't think we only want to focus on manufacturing. Manufacturing has become very capital intensive. So, you build the big machinery and you need two people to run it. Now, there is the system around them. There's this restaurants and the other that spring up around it that support the factory, but it is very capital intensive. We're not going to bring back the kind of manufacturing we once had. But I do believe that's a worthy goal. But this is a tough way to get there. So I think, the solution is to lower the tariffs and let's get back to the kind, like there wasn't anything, as you pointed out, like we were doing pretty well. Yeah.
So I now want to segue a little bit into, you were talking about how you feel like we might have some economic policy. So most of our big Social Security, the unemployment insurance system were created in 1935, right? At a time at which the economy was very different, more agrarian, more manufacturing, far fewer women in the economy, though certainly none. So what were you saying when that we don't have these systems built for a service economy where even if we want more manufacturing jobs, we're still mostly white collar jobs at this point?
So I think the part that I'm focused on, so this comes a bit from from thinking about the care economy in particular, where one of the things that has changed since 1935, 1950, 1960 is women have joined the labor force. And when women join the labor force, and it's not to say men can't do this, but that we disproportionately lost people at home to care for children or for elderly parents. So someone needs to take care. We need to take care of the little ones and the older ones, and it's very expensive in this country. Our care system, especially on both ends, is not. It's a very low wage system. We rely on immigrant workers for much of it, and yet it's very expensive for households. And so at the same time, we have, given just the demographic shift in this country, the dependency ratio, that's the numbers of people under the age of, 18 and over the age of 65, 70 per working age adult, and that is rising. So we have fewer workers per younger and older worker, and that is not part of a recipe for continued economic growth. So how do you solve that? So one is to help people who want to work. Not everybody wants to work, but help people who want to work. That is making it easier for them to have someone take care of their kids and their parents. It is having a healthy immigration system. But we need to be focused on the fact that we need workers. Now, people may say, well, that's what AI is going to solve us. Maybe. We will see. I think we're still trying to understand what the role of AI is going to be in our economy. We've gone through much, very drastic technological change in this country, and it hasn't fully crowded out workers. People need something to do. It may change the nature of work, but we're still going to need workers, so it may help a little bit. But we need to confront this if we're going to maintain our level of growth. So we need systems that help with a safety net. We need systems to help people balance care responsibilities and work.
So when you're talking about a future of home health work jobs and of jobs in childcare centers, as you mentioned, you're talking about jobs that are impervious to productivity improvement, and that's a good thing, right? We don't want a robot taking care of our babies. We want, a skilled person taking care of a small number of them, and that will be true presumably for the rest of the time. And those are also, they're difficult jobs, and they're also low-wage jobs. So that doesn't necessarily, at least with the system we have right now, sound like a beautiful, bounteous future. So how do you address that part of things if you're talking about an economy that needs more care work, both because literally there are more care needs. But again, as you pointed out, if you want people to work, you need to make it possible for them to work.
So this is where we start to talk about, so what's the role of government? And I believe in private markets. I think, price signals and all the things actually are really make for productivity growth and innovation. And it helps to allocate how we spend our resources. But there are places where the private sector is not going to solve all problems, and this is one of them. And part of the problem is that everybody needs care, but and if we want to have, and we know with quality care, you've got to pay for it. And so there's a gap between what households can afford and what they can, and what is really quality. And given that there's a spillover to economic growth, so we all benefit when children are taken care of well. If there's one result we have in economics, is that high quality childcare leads to pays for itself several times over throughout the lifetime of the child. And I think there's a social contract in terms of our older population as well, that there's a role for government here. I think this goes to, again, part of maybe this is on the political side of reimagination, is we have to figure out a way. I think Derek said this. We have to figure out a way to have investments and possibilities for younger workers and younger members of our population, and not have everything sort of disproportionately being spent on older parts of our population. This may not go down well, but right now, part of the reason why the DOGE effort is not really going to help a lot, there are many reasons, but the discretionary portion of our federal government expenditures is only a third. That 2/3 is on our mandatory side, and that's Social Security, Medicare, and some of Medicaid. And while it's painful to think about, I do not believe in reneging on social contracts, but right now we are spending a lot on sort of not investing in our younger parts of our population in order to fully protect older ones. There are proposals out there, and there's reform out there that can help us do that. That take advantage of changes in our society since Social Security was set up. It has become the third rail of politics, and because we're not addressing it, we're not freeing up resources in order to provide some of these other services and roles for government that I think a lot of younger people would actually prefer and need if we're going to really sustain growth going forward.
I'm wondering if you could comment on, there's been a number of proposals, either for the expansion of the child tax credit, or more recently we saw a proposal for, $5,000 for new parents, both to help support parents, but also just to encourage people to have more kids. And I'm wondering what you make of those proposals, because it strikes me that, we haven't done a lot of that policy making. But, you hear a lot about the fertility crisis, which is not a term that I love. But nevertheless, it certainly seems like one that both parties are really starting to talk about in increasingly dire terms.
Well, again, one of the things that the economic evidence, economists, you ask for an economist's opinion, you get 12 different answers, right? So, but one thing that the data and the evidence really does suggest is that when you make investments in young children, it really does pay for itself over the life of the child, and that includes a child tax credit. So children who have better nutrition and are fed better are afforded more opportunities when they're very young because their parents have more discretionary income, go on to thrive. They do better in school, and they do better all the way through their lives. It's a good investment for us to be making. What we also know about these kinds of investments is that they're not going to turn around, if you want to call it a fertility crisis, right? Right. It's right. Parenting is more complicated than just the dollars. It's all about what is the social contract and what else, and the fact that we still have to manage time and who's responsible for what. And so becoming a parent and having responsibilities is much more complicated than simply giving households a few more dollars. And we can see this looking at other countries, Scandinavian countries, which are far more supportive of parenting. But I think it's necessary but not sufficient.
Mm-hmm. So we only have just a couple minutes left, and I want to bring it back to the unusual economic moment that we are in, where, one of the things that you said earlier in the conversation is that probably the best way to deal with the economic uncertainty, perhaps the signs of a slowdown that we're dealing with right now, is to remove the tariffs, which might or might not happen. Are there thoughts that you have for just people about how to act in this moment? so many of the folks I talk to, they're afraid, they're starting to pull back. They're like, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I won't do this. I'm just wondering, when you're talking to your friends, like, what do you tell people to do in this environment, and which I think everybody is quite confused.
Gee, thanks, Annie. We are a a democracy. So it is speak up and let your voices be heard. I guess I would suggest that. Again, at Brookings, we're trying to come up with ideas and to, understand what is happening, and can we understand the implications, and, in the DC region, what have been the implications economically, just locally, but what are other ramifications, and then looking a little further, understanding, well, how do we have a more modern democracy? What are some reforms we can be making? Not to just rebuild, because that obviously got us to where we are today, but how do we really build a modern democracy? And then if you things as mundane as our tax code. Our tax code is about 100 years old. The kind of income that people have, that is largely, our revenues are based on labor income, but that is largely a numbers game. Because of the baby boom, we're doing very well, but as the baby boom retires, we're going to have less labor income. So again, we're going to have less federal revenue. And so on the other hand, we have more capital income that we do not tax as effectively. So how do we build even a tax system that allows us to reflect the sort of our modern economy and where people get their income, but also reflects our current society and generates enough revenue for the federal government to do its job? So we're trying to focus on, how do you build a better mousetrap?
And I will say that, one of the things that I think is happening in the policy world, and I think you can see this at Brookings and other institutions, is there's a sense that the Overton window has been thrown open. And there's a sense that people are thinking much bigger, much more foundationally than they were, even just beyond whether we have a recession or not. But just, if we are going to be changing these systems dramatically, what do we want them to look like?
That's exactly.
Yeah. So I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Rouse. Thank you to everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
I think you can just leave it on there.